This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/JavaScript Jabber.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode Fill in the Blank of the JavaScript Jabber show. I'm your host, Joe Eames, and today we have on our panel AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you live from rainy. Why is it raining? It should be snowing.
Yeah, I know. And Aimee Knight.
Hello from Nashville.
And as our special guest today, we have Chris Ferdinandi.
Hey, everyone. I'm coming in from Massachusetts, since that's apparently what we're doing.
So as much as I want to talk about Utah's crazy weather and the proof of global warming, I think we should talk about our topic. Today we're going to be talking about teaching vanilla JavaScript. But before we do, I think it would be a great idea to have you, Chris, introduce yourself a little bit and why this is a topic that interests you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Chris Ferdinandi. My primary kind of thing that I do these days is teach people, in particular beginners or folks who come from more of a design background, JavaScript. I started my career as a human resource guy after going to school for anthropology. And at some point along the line, ended up self-teaching my way into originally web design and then web development. And one of the things I found when I was trying to find web development jobs was that if I didn't know, or because I didn't know JavaScript, I kept getting turned down for a lot of stuff. So I took it upon myself to try and learn. And one of the things that I found was that it's really difficult to teach yourself because, or at least a few years ago it was, your options were either really hostile web forums where people are hyper aggressive towards what are considered stupid beginner questions, bad documentation, tutorials that are incomplete or out of date. Eventually I kind of wrapped my head around everything. And now that I know it, I've really kind of focused my time on helping other people who are trying to learn not have as tough a time as I did trying to wrap their head around all this stuff.
So wait a second, I need some clarity here. You're saying you found some hostile people on the internet?
It's crazy, right? Like, who would have thought? But,
I'm glad that's never happened to me.
No.
No, I will, and like I joke about that, but like I will say, on the whole, one of the things I absolutely love about our profession is how generally open and willing to share people are, and there are absolutely soapboxes and tiny hills that people are willing to die on over stuff. But generally speaking, compared to some stuff I've seen in more broad other professions and corporate life, I honestly think we're not doing so bad.
Right.
But the forums like Stack Overflow is an awesome resource with a lot of people who are super, super terrible to people who are just trying to learn.
Yeah. That's interesting. So was there other places besides Stack Overflow you tried that you found negative communities? And then what places have you found that are more positive communities?
Yeah, it's been a few years ago now, and now that I'm getting older, my my memory is not quite as great as it used to be. But the places that were really most helpful were so obviously like CSS Tricks does so much more than just CSS, and both Chris Coyer and his guest authors, as well as kind of the nice community of folks he's built over there, have been incredible. At the time that I was learning, Twitter was still kind of old school good Twitter and not modern horrible Twitter. So that was a really, really great resource for me. And then the other thing that really honestly helped probably more than anything was I kind of learned by just saying like, okay, here's a thing I want to build. Let me Google a whole bunch of stuff until I figure it out. Like a show more, show less link, for example. You click it, it shows some content. You click it, it hides the content. And anytime I'd create something like that, I would throw it up on GitHub And not because I was trying to get a bunch of people to use it, but I just wanted a place to kind of store all this stuff. But people would kind of sometimes find it and start playing with it and create bug reports or issues. And they were never like jerks about it. It was just like, hey, here's a thing I found that's not working, or like, am I doing this wrong? And it helped me identify a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't realize I was doing wrong, or that I kind of previously wasn't aware of. And eventually I started getting pull requests, which was nice because then people would fix the things I didn't know how to do for me, and I would learn from looking at their code, which was great. And then honestly, the thing that probably helped me more than anything, so there's this guy out of the UK, Todd Motto, who's now hyper-focused on Angular, and he's kind of like one of the go-to guys in the Angular community. But at the time, he was all about plain vanilla native JavaScript. And I started reading some of his articles, and I just on a whim decided to email him with some questions. And he wrote back and kept writing back every time I would ask him questions. And eventually he became kind of a friend of mine. And he would never consider himself a mentor, but to me, that's what he was. And he was just so cool about giving me honest, unadulterated feedback about the code I was writing, the things I was doing wrong, the things I was doing well, answering some of those stupid beginner questions for me without making me feel like a jerk for asking them. So yeah, that helped quite a bit. I legitimately owe my career to Todd and a couple of other folks who did similar things.
Wow, that's awesome. Really like Todd. Absolutely. He's a good guy.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
He's coming out to visit us here in Salt Lake in April at NGConf.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, Todd's I'm really like he's doing so well with Ultimate Angular now, and I'm just, even though I'm personally not a fan of Angular as a framework, I'm just so happy to see kind of all his success because he's definitely put in the work and earned it.
Cool. So had some negative experiences, had some positive experiences. And from that, you decided that you would go into doing some education on your own as well?
Yeah. So I after... Not right away, but so after I kind of wrapped my head around what I was doing, or I pretty much throughout the whole time I was wrapping my head around what I was doing, I continued to just write articles and put together little YouTube videos and stuff that I was learning. And amongst a whole bunch of other stuff, I'd been hyper-focused on WordPress and web performance for a while. One of the things I found was that the most popular articles on my site tended to be how to do jQuery things without jQuery. And the more I'd write about that stuff, the more people started kind of coming to my site and emailing me about things. So eventually, at some point, about maybe a year and a half ago, I decided to make that the primary focus of what I do. I ended up writing an ebook that got broken up into a series of, at the feedback of my readers, a series of smaller, shorter guides on some focused topics on JavaScript. And now I'm working on a video course or a series of video courses on similar topics. But yeah, I found that I really, as people would ask questions and I would help them work through stuff and kind of basically becoming a Todd myself, not nearly as big or successful as he is, but kind of doing a lot of the stuff he did for me. I find that really personally rewarding, kind of helping people not have quite as hard a time wrapping their head around this stuff. Because once you kind of have that Neo in the Matrix moment and can see all the zeros and ones, JavaScript makes a lot of sense. But early on, I think it's a lot more confusing to learn than something like CSS is, just because some of the kind of the conventions and the naming of things is not nearly as obvious as you want to change the background color on something, you use background color. Like that's really straightforward. JavaScript is not always as obvious in its conventions.
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to say CSS is easy because there are definitely some really crazy things you can do with CSS that are way over my head. But I think the basics are a little easier to learn, even though the mastery of it can be just as difficult.
So in your opinion, you think CSS is a little bit easier to learn than JavaScript?
Okay. So That is a a controversial statement that I won't fully endorse. I think it's a little bit like, for me, the analogy I like to fall back to is snowboarding versus skiing. And if you've ever tried to learn both, this might make a bit more sense than if you've only tried to learn one or the other. But the basics of skiing are a little bit easier to pick up because it's two independent feet pointed straight forward, kind of moving in the direction you're facing. Whereas snowboarding, you typically spend the first 3 days you're learning falling over and over again, getting really bruised and having basically nothing to show for it. And I think learning CSS is a little bit like learning skiing. Learning JavaScript is a little bit like learning snowboarding because at first you have literally no idea what you're doing. It's super awkward and uncomfortable. But then eventually you get it and it becomes easier and easier to do more and more and more. Whereas I actually find the exact opposite with CSS, where a lot of the basics are relatively straightforward. So if you wanted to build a really simple 3-column layout in CSS, like an old school blogging site, that's relatively straightforward to do. But as you start to get deeper and deeper into it and start to really master the craft,
like centering things on the page.
Oh my gosh.
You guys all need to watch my talk. This is not that bad.
Vertically centering, yeah.
And Push Flexbox makes that wonderful.
It really does. Some of the nuances of multi-device design, that stuff can get pretty complicated. And I think that's where it becomes a little bit more like skiing because you can spend a lifetime trying to master skiing and still never really perfect it. And I think this notion that CSS is easier than JavaScript permeates the JavaScript community. And it's one of the reasons why so many JavaScript developers lobby for stuff like CSS and JavaScript and all these other things because they either think CSS isn't important or don't really value it as a craft. I think part of that comes from the fact that it's a markup language. It's not a programming language. So people are automatically going to dismiss it because of that. Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's ironic though, because they also complain about it being too difficult and confusing at the same time. So I don't know, there's a little bit of a dichotomy going on here.
I think people will say something is difficult and confusing when they don't want to understand it because that's the easier way out. Typically, I mean, I myself, I'm responsible for it. I used to do that as well.
Yeah, and I to be fair, I used to do the same thing about JavaScript. This is confusing. It doesn't make any sense.
I don't know how someone could possibly be good at both CSS and JavaScript because it seems like your brain would have to be broken in both ways.
I mean, it requires a completely different mindset. In JavaScript, global variables are bad. In CSS, it's a good thing. You want the cascade.
The funny thing, I found the better and the more immersed I've gotten into JavaScript, the fuzzier my CSS skills have gotten. It's one of those a little bit like riding a bike. You never really forget how to do it, but you wouldn't necessarily stop riding for 5 years and then go, compete in a triathlon or a cycling competition. So yeah, I absolutely agree. I think kind of the approaches to both are different. And I'm also skeptical of this idea of a controversial statement coming, but the notion of a full stack developer. I've always found that folks who claim to be full stack developers are usually people who specialize in one thing and they're kind of mediocre in the rest, and that's okay. But they're often put up on this pedestal like they're experts at everything, and it results in kind of some issues when you're kind of relying on that person to do everything for everyone. And I just...
I wanted to add to that too. This is all stuff that I've kind of spent a lot of time thinking about last year. And I think that is true too. I was full stack for 2 years, and then I went to front end, and I realized when I was doing front end that when I was in full stack, it was the JavaScript that was the important part, and then CSS was just good enough, as long as it looks okay. But now I work for Warner Brothers, and their design is everything. So if the CSS doesn't look exactly like the design, then that's just as bad as a JavaScript not working.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And, there's nothing, again, I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with being a full stack developer. I just wish we were as an industry or as a community a little bit more honest about the limitations of what any one person can know. I think, often full stack developers are people who are really great at either JavaScript or a back-end language and then know enough about the front end, often a lot about the front end, but not enough that I would consider them true experts. Generally
what about
speaking.
Node developers? Do you think it has a matter? Does it have anything to do with the language, like Node, where you get to use JavaScript on both the back and the front, or is it a matter of perspective and paradigm?
That's pretty interesting, right? So and I know some folks who are really all in on Node, and they are exceptionally good at both front end JavaScript and server side JavaScript. But in my experience, their CSS knowledge has a particular limit, and in a community where we often devalue CSS, that's not always seen as an issue, but I think it is. Those are the kinds of things that result in accessibility issues or just weird design quirks that crop up in unexpected ways. So yeah, I fundamentally don't think any one person can know everything. 15, 20 years ago when we were still building with tables, sure. But these days, I think it's okay to admit you don't know everything about everything.
But when you're talking about the difference between a front end and like full stack, you're not talking about the JavaScript front end. You're talking about the CSS front end then?
Well, it's a bit of a spectrum, right? So like there are some folks who are pretty good at JavaScript and CSS, but don't really know anything about back-end languages. There are some folks who are really good at a multitude of back-end languages and know enough about CSS and JavaScript to be passable. So it comes in, it's a diverse, I think, set of skills that vary from individual to individual, which is, I think, even why like things like calling someone a full stack developer are a bit of a misnomer, because something somewhere is suffering. I shouldn't say suffering. It's just you literally cannot be an expert at all the things. And so there's kind of this perception that maybe you can.
In my head, and this is something that isn't what is in other people's head, but when people say to me front-end developer, I think a person that understands the DOM, because the DOM has nothing to do with JavaScript, right? Mm-hmm. It's its own language that's a plugin to JavaScript in the same way that JRuby or IronPython or any of those other things have a separate language that they're intermingling with to bring properties that don't exist into that language or in that language into that language. And so, people ask me, am I a front-end developer? I'll say yes, but I don't do CSS. And they get all confused. And I'm like, I'm not a designer. I'm a developer, and I understand the DOM, and I understand HTTP, and I understand headers, and I understand how a browser works and the rendering cycle,
So I agree with that. I agree with that. I also think there are some front-end developers who know CSS and HTML and not JavaScript, and I don't think that makes them any less of a front-end developer because of that. Like I know some people get like uncomfortable calling themselves developer without that JS component.
But hold on a second. Don't you think there's plenty of front-end developers out there? It's kind of directed at AJ. Plenty of front-end developers out there who really don't know the DOM because the abstractions that a framework puts in place might completely hide a lot of the details about the DOM.
And I think that it's good to know about the DOM. But I don't know. Like I consider myself more of a computer science person than just I'm not into Rails because Rails is all about creating cookie cutter sites, right? I mean, I don't think that's derogatory in any way. People make a lot of money. Rails is like WordPress plus.
It's a good thing Chuck's not here.
But no, I mean, but that's the thing is like it's clients that have very similar needs that fit into a very narrow focus of a framework. I mean, and I don't mean any disrespect in that. It's very good at what it does.
Yep.
But it is WordPress plus. Like WordPress is very good at what it does, but somebody that wants Rails would hate it. And I think similarly, somebody that really wants Node would probably scoff at Rails.
I'd have to say that knowing you, I think that statement is way less insulting than it might seem at first to say somebody like Chuck, just because you are so far out on the fringes as a developer as far as what you do. And when I say that, I mean like in the very best sense of the word, right? Like,
I do the weird stuff, okay?
Right. Esoteric, I think, is a great word to describe you, AJ. Right. So you're building, what you did. Didn't you do an app that did RF? Were you involved with some RF stuff, right? In JavaScript.
I took a radar that was outputting over a composite video cable and turned it into a web app that used Google Maps in real time.
So that's the type of stuff that you normally build. When you say cookie cutter, to me, I think an entirely different thing than what you, I believe, really mean, right? Like, for me, Rails is a perfect engine to build a very wide, it's not the cookie. It's when you need cookie cutter for WordPress. When you don't need cookie cutter, then you go to Rails. For you, Rails is still in cookie cutter land, and the weird stuff is something that just can't be done with Rails. And you need something like Node, because most people think of Node and they think of, I think in general, especially when they're speaking backend, it's like Node is really Express. That's what they're really thinking in their mind, is they're just thinking Express, right? But Node is so much more baseline than that, right? Node is much lower level, which is why we see that Node has now become this de facto thing for all these client-side utilities that we use, NPM and Webpack and Grunt, et cetera, right? It's much more base than that. It's kind of like C++ in its own way in the web world, right? It's the underlying thing that we do a lot of stuff in. So I totally get what you're saying when you say that there's this cookie cutter stuff and then there's everything else.
Well, I think what you said is exactly true. And you could go up a level and say something like Squarespace is for cookie cutter sites and WordPress is for the weird stuff. And the people that anytime you're on the scale that's down, the thing that's above is cookie cutter and the thing that's below is weird stuff.
All right, Chris, I got a question for you. I'm going to relate an experience from my life, and I'll have you chip in on what you think is the problems and the right solutions here. Okay, so sure. I was a back-end developer for a long time doing .NET and C# and I mean a web developer, right? I was doing websites, but I was using a back-end language, no real front-end. I knew very little JavaScript. Decided I'm going to become a JavaScript developer. So a front-end developer. So I became a front-end developer and started working with Backbone, and then eventually started doing some Angular. Around that time, after I'd been doing it for a short while, a couple of years, I got an opportunity to go out to Facebook and interview with Facebook. So they had me build a little app first, and then they flew me out there to interview. When I went out to interview, they basically asked me to do a fairly simple whiteboard exercise where I had to code up an algorithm to display images and like make them flow on the page. And I didn't know the raw JavaScript DOM API very well. I knew jQuery, and I didn't know. CSS is definitely a weak spot of mine, and I would say that although I have a reasonable understanding of the DOM, at the time it was worse, and it's certainly not an area I would consider myself to be an expert in. So I did my interview, and I think I did okay, but I was not given an offer. Meanwhile, a friend of mine, Merritt Christensen, who AJ knows very well,
and is excellent at CSS and knows the browser very well.
Oh my gosh!
Rare combo, very rare combo.
Yeah. So he goes out basically the same time, unbeknownst to me. We just both happened to go out within a couple of weeks of each other. Neither of us knew. We both worked at the same company, and we were keeping it hush hush, right? Because we didn't want to tell our company we were interviewing with Facebook. And we found out later on we'd both gone out, like months later we found out we'd both gone out to Facebook within a week or so of each other and interviewed. Well, he goes out there and they ask him the same thing, and he just whips it out in just raw JavaScript, the DOM API, knows exactly, he knew that API like the back of his hand and solves it. And they gave him an offer. Right. And he says that they even said that they were kind of blown away as to how well he understood the DOM and the DOM API. Now, since that time, I would say I've gotten a little bit better, but I certainly would still not call myself an expert enough that I could do this sort of stuff at the back of my hand, off the back, like, from rote. Do you consider that to be a problem? And then what are the solutions for that? Where are we at today? Is that an absolutely necessary skill that when you consider yourself to be a senior level front-end engineer, that you should be able to do that solve that sort of problem? Whereas I think today we still see a lot of people relying on frameworks and abstractions.
So problem number one was probably interviewing at Facebook, but no, I joke.
Wait a second. Are you not a fan of React either? If you're not a fan of Angular, you have to be a fan of React.
I think they all have. We can get into this if you really want to. And that comment was not a dig at React as much as
Facebook. It is for Facebook. Well, I'll go with you on that one.
And hopefully that gets the recruiters to stop emailing me. But
let's put a pin in that and come back to it after.
So we'll put a pin in that. But so your actual question though, I don't think it's so I know plenty of senior developers who look stuff up all the time. This is one of those things, like I actually really hate interview processes like that. And I say that as someone who used to work in HR and used to kind of be mildly involved in recruiting processes, although I was never like actually a recruiter. The way we select people is really obnoxious. Like you're never on the job going to have to whip out something like that from scratch in an hour, just out of your own head. There are plenty of, there was a thing trending on Twitter like a couple of months ago where people were admitting all the things they look up on a regular basis. And there were so many people owning up to the fact that they have to, like people who have created these large open source projects, admitting that they have to look at their own documentation to figure out how to do stuff and the thing they create all the time. I think John Resig was actually one of them, talking about how he looks at the jQuery documentation to do stuff on a regular basis. And I don't know, this is kind of this thing that goes back to when we were in school and you were expected to remember all this stuff. And then in the real world, when you're actually working in a job, like no one comes up to you and says like, you need to code this thing right now from scratch and you have an hour. And if you don't do it, you're fired. Like that just doesn't happen.
No textbook peeking either. You'll be done.
Yeah. Like you need time to like think through problems and like try a couple things and mess it up and then go like, I constantly like one of the things that comes with all of the tutorials and things I sell is this vanilla JavaScript toolkit that has this massive cheat sheet of stuff, from like the really simple how to find an element in the DOM and how to like listen to events to some of the more complicated, like, hey, here's this really helpful helper method in jQuery. Here's how you do the same thing in vanilla. And I look at that thing constantly when I'm writing scripts, when I'm writing apps, when I'm working on client projects. I don't know. I have heard a lot of things about the Facebook recruiting process, the Google recruiting process. I am not a fan of those because I don't think they appropriately simulate how people actually work on the job. I've done whiteboard exercises before when going out to interview for jobs. And the best ones I've found kind of try and get more at how you think through things rather than asking you to actually like make an actual thing.
So I want to interject and say that there's definitely value to doing the annoying code this up on a whiteboard, like because I've done the thing I've hired someone based on they're able to articulate extremely well their understanding and talk through a problem, but then actually implementing it didn't work. So I like to do both. I want to know that a person can think through a problem, but I also want to see you can do fizz buzz, as insulting as it may sound.
Yeah.
You know, granted, it takes longer when you're being watched and you feel like, oh, this is a stupid problem. I should solve this in 30 seconds. I can't solve it in 30 seconds.
But so the counterpoint to that is I agree with your why you like whiteboard exercises. I disagree with the notion that whiteboard exercises effectively evaluate that in candidates. Namely, interview processes like that are really good at funneling out of the process people who suck at interviewing. That doesn't mean they're bad communicators. It doesn't mean they're bad developers. It just means that they're really uncomfortable performing on the spot on a whiteboard for an audience. And not all folks are like that. But if you think about a lot of the developers you met, there are some folks within our community who are on the spectrum or the autism spectrum, or just socially uncomfortable. They have, and I like to distinguish socially uncomfortable from introversion because they're not always the same thing. But there are so many reasons why someone could be both a good communicator and a good implementer, and also not good at the interview process. And in my mind, all the traditional interview really does, and all whiteboard exercises do, are find people who are good at interviewing. Some of the better interview processes I've gone through, or recruiting processes I've gone through, have asked me to implement projects, but have done it in a way that's more reflective of how a real world thing would work, where I'm given a day or two to go off, work on a particular project I've been given, and then come back with both my solution and some articulation around what I did and why. And I think that second part there really helps you get around this whole, well, what if they just go copy and paste from Stack Overflow or have a friend do it for them? I suppose having a friend do it for them, they could still kind of give you some why, but it at least screens out some of the Stack Overflow stuff. Or you can kind of do a follow-up where you look at what they've done and ask them questions about the choices they've made. But just the whiteboard piece, it's such a high pressure thing that causes people who aren't good at particular styles of communication or interviewing to do badly, even though they're really good developers.
So I totally agree with you. At least in my case, you're totally preaching to the choir. And that's never going to change. And it's for the same exact, in my opinion, it's for the same exact reason that we're never going to see standardized tests leave schools. Mm-hmm. And that is because it's far too easy and simple of a litmus test to use in hiring.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
It has nothing, it's not about the effectiveness of it. It's about the fact that it makes you think as an interviewer that it has some correlation to their performance as an employee. And it's very simple to measure, just like a standardized test is. The point of school is to learn. It's not to be able to pass a test, because in life we aren't given written tests, right? And school isn't preparing us for that same thing. We're not going to code on a whiteboard, but it feels like it's related and it's easy to judge.
Yeah, this is an HR problem as much as, and it's not just obviously like hiring managers who aren't in HR do this sort of thing too, because they had to do it themselves and whatnot. But yeah, just human resources as a profession still hasn't figured out how to effectively evaluate candidates, and that trickles down into all sorts of other things. So I agree. I don't think it'll go away. I often turn down, I've only had one where I've had to do a whiteboard and I didn't turn it down because I wanted the job so bad. But in my head with where I am now, I would probably turn down a job that required me to go do the whiteboard in person thing. Just like I also turn down jobs that don't offer remote work opportunities these days. But I know not everybody's in that position.
Yeah,
so
when you're in that position, that's nice.
Yeah, I kind of feel like a snobby elitist when I say, well, just turn down the whiteboard jobs. But no, that's not always realistic for some people. And I think you're right. I don't think it's going to go away. I just hate them.
I pretty quickly got enough influence in my companies as an interviewer that I could start doing the interviews the way that I wanted. And I just always did pair programming. I'd ask them to come in for at least an hour, if not a couple, and just come pair program with me.
Nice.
This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at javascriptjabber.com/KendoUI.
Yeah, I like that better too. That's actually a good point. We almost have a responsibility, if you agree with us on this particular take here, to try and influence the way your company does things like that.
Right. So we kind of took a tangent on talking about interviews, but we were going back to raw DOM knowledge, that sort of thing, right? Like I definitely was lacking at the time. I would still say I'm somewhat lacking. I'm definitely better, but I would still say that I'm lacking compared to a lot of people that I know. Is that a problem? Is that something people should be addressing?
Yeah, and we had put a pin in this kind of well, which frameworks do you like, Chris? Kind of conversation too, which I think really ties in here. And so one of the things that kind of came up when we were originally scheduling this chat was the challenges that happen when you learn frameworks first or exclusively rather than kind of learning plain JavaScript first. And for me, there are a couple. But I think the big one is it really just well, there's a few. So let's see. I'm trying to think about where to start here. So I learned on jQuery. I guess that's kind of my full disclosure here. So I learned on an abstracted library and then took all the stuff I had written in jQuery and taught myself vanilla JavaScript by kind of transcribing it over.
Hold on. If you learned on jQuery, you learned on JavaScript, and then you learned native DOM, which is not vanilla JavaScript, because JavaScript doesn't have array lists. It doesn't have all those weird C++ object types.
That is true. And for a while, I was conflating kind of this JavaScript versus DOM APIs thing. And like one of the things I still like when I mention like, so query selector all returns a node list, not an array. And they're like, well, what's the difference? And it's like, well, they're very similar, but a node list is actually a DOM API thing that JavaScript has access to.
And it didn't get the new for each and sort and map and all the other things that you have on
and so
Rails.
it brings up all sorts of weird kind of conversations. But yeah, no, you're right. And I still to this day tend to kind of use the two interchangeably just for kind of ease of conversation. But you are from a technical and semantic perspective, correct? But the thing, and I'm not trying. I know that sounded like a super.
No, it's okay. I'm very much that way. So.
No, and it's my wife is the same way. With like, she really likes technical specificity, so it doesn't bother me. But
because I love JavaScript, I don't like the DOM.
And that's
the DOM. Anyway, I don't want to detract you. Go on.
Yeah, no, and so the so a couple of the bigger issues, or for me, like the overarching thing with not so much jQuery, but a lot of these newer things. So like when you get into Angular and React and Vue, is they reinforce for me this culture of over-reliance on JavaScript in a way that I think is legitimately hurting the web.
What do you mean?
So it's almost like you give someone a hammer, every problem is a nail kind of thing. So I'll use React or Angular as kind of two primary examples, but so with React is a framework that helps you build UIs with JavaScript. And there's obviously a little bit more to it than that. And you can also run it on the server now and everything, which is great. But you see a lot of people using React, like Facebook does, to build entire websites. So they're rendering all of the markup in JavaScript. And I think that's wrong. Just purely speaking, like Facebook can be a very fast site. And once that React file loads and all the dependencies load, page changes can be quick. But you end up with this very brittle experience that depends entirely on the weakest part of the front end stack. Like if a browser runs into some weird HTML element it doesn't recognize, it just skips it and keeps going. If the browser hits some weird CSS property or attribute or class or selector it doesn't recognize, it just skips it and keeps going. If you forget a semicolon or use the wrong variable name, the browser chokes and stops doing anything else.
All right. I want to jump in here on a couple of counterpoints. Well,
that's a feature, not a bug, by the way.
beyond the obvious issue of you chose a poor example with semicolons, since JavaScript is mostly semicolon optional. But
that's fair.
Like CSS, for example, if you put in one that it doesn't recognize, it skips it. But if you get it wrong, one bad CSS property can completely visually destroy an entire site. Just one thing off, just a tiny bit, can completely destroy. So even though JavaScript stops interpreting when it encounters something it can't handle, and encounters bad syntax, CSS has some of its own issues in similar ways. Yes, the HTML processor is super robust in browsers nowadays, and CSS is as well. But
you forget to close the div.
Yeah, you could have some problems there. I mean, there's all definitely kinds of ways. But that being said, I think your point is definitely right. That JavaScript sits on potentially the weakest, or certainly the most likely to cause the problem. I mean, how many times have you been to a site and the JavaScript was broken? And that's probably, in my experience, the most common reason a site was broken, and not because they got the HTML or CSS wrong.
And no, your point about the whole, like, you could visually hide something critical, or like that is absolutely valid. And this for me is a big part of the danger in relying on a JavaScript developer to also write the CSS if it's not kind of a core competency of theirs. You need people who really specialize in CSS. But and yes, my example about the semicolons was a poor choice. But the likelihood that someone's going to botch CSS in a way that they like completely bork a whole site is much lower than that they're going to mess up JavaScript in a way that does, because it's not just like you wrote your code wrong. It's and I encountered this all the time at one corporate company I used to work at. They had a very aggressive firewall because they worked with some technology that was used by government contractors, and so they were super tight about security. They had a JavaScript whitelist rather than a blacklist. So if your site depended on a JavaScript file that got blocked by their company firewall, that site was not working. And this manifests itself in things like, like really simple ways, like, all of a sudden that button I have to click to view your whole menu doesn't open anymore, or doesn't open. So I can't leave the home page. That's like a really simple thing. But there's obviously ways to build around that. But if your whole front end depends on JavaScript, like all of the markup, all of the content, you've built a site that is way more fragile than it has to be. And yes, React, Vue, Angular, they all offer kind of server-side versions now, and that's great. But that's not the way that most people are building with these frameworks. And more to the point, I've seen a mentality come out of the culture of newer developers that is markedly different from the way that folks who used the web 15 or 20 years ago think about it. It's kind of like this app versus document mindset. And not that I think you shouldn't build apps on the web, because I do, but I always think about the web as being something that's for everyone. It should, within reason, work on every browser, on every device. There should always be some sort of kind of fallback access or content that's available to people. And I find that, and not exclusively, but a lot of folks who build with these newer frameworks and learn on them, and to be a little discriminate here, are potentially a little bit younger or grew up with a world in which the web has always existed for them. The way they think about the web is sometimes fundamentally different. It's this notion that, well, it's really easy to update your browser. Just download the latest one and then everything will work. Or everybody has access to a high-speed internet connection these days. And, obviously React and Angular and Vue are not exclusively to blame for this problem, but they're part of a culture that reinforces it.
It's very interesting. I mean, it's definitely
this
a good
is a controversial statement. Not everybody agrees with me here.
Well, yeah, totally, it's a good attitude to have, and we've seen this in various forms through progressive enhancement pushes and things like that. But there's an easy counterpoint to that, and that is that it's extremely expensive to build that way and still end up with sites that are as UI rich as the sites that we're seeing nowadays.
Sure. And that is valid. And that's actually why I really like seeing things like, server-side React and server-side Vue. Like, I think these are awesome. The virtual DOM kind of enables you to do some really great stuff there. There's also this, there's this tendency, and this is where, I kind of alluded to this with if you give someone a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. But there's also this tendency to, if you've learned on a particular framework first, you either don't venture out to other kind of frameworks and learn different ways of doing things, or you use these frameworks for problems that could be much more simply and elegantly and high performancely solved. That's not a word, but we're going to use it as one, solved just using a little sprinkling of plain old JavaScript. And this kind of is like a callback to the old, you just use jQuery response that's so prevalent on Stack Overflow these days, where it's like, how do I get an element on the page and change its color? Just use jQuery. Even when people specifically say, I don't want to use jQuery for this, I think you start to see some of that now with some of these larger frameworks, And it's unfair to call them larger because a lot of them are about the same size as jQuery is. But with some of these newer frameworks, I guess is maybe the way to describe it. One of the other problems, and please feel free to interrupt me at any point, but one of the other challenges I think with not knowing kind of the vanilla JavaScript or the core DOM APIs, but one of the things I hear about a lot from new developers who are trying to learn is just this complete feeling of being overwhelmed by the pace with which new front end frameworks come out, and with how quickly we as a culture drop the old thing for the latest new hotness.
Step 1, buy a $3,000 MacBook. Step 2, download 7 gigabytes of NPM. Step 3, learn these 17 super easy frameworks.
Right? So like Angular was like the thing 3 years ago. And people still use Angular. It hasn't gone away, but then React was the new hotness for about a year and a half. And now I'm hearing more and more about React is great, but I'm really excited about Vue, which has actually been around for a long time, but people are just kind of starting to get into it now. And on it goes. And one of the things that's nice about knowing vanilla JavaScript is, one, it's easier to kind of wade in and out of these frameworks if you want to. But 2, you also start to realize that in many cases for the things you're trying to do, you can forego them altogether. There are valid reasons why you may want to use them, but oftentimes you don't necessarily need them. And if you do, it's really easy, not really easy, but it's easier to kind of wade in and out of some of these frameworks.
Well, if you build your code in JavaScript, not in DOM, not in React, but in JavaScript, that you can take that library and you can write a 3-line wrapper to make it work, or maybe it ends up being a 10-line wrapper. But you can write very small, tiny wrappers around your library to have it, or use dependency injection so that you use the correct promise framework or the correct request framework for whatever library system, or reverse that, the correct request library or the correct promise library for whatever framework you're using.
Right. Yeah, and one of the things I've become very fond of these days is using just plain JavaScript with some of the nicer ES6 stuff that really draws from some of the things that these frameworks have done, and then not even running it through Babel or anything, just slapping in some polyfills so that all browsers can take advantage of these, and I don't have to.
Amen.
I don't have to run a terminal command, or it's just there's something really, really. And again, this is probably because I'm so damn old at this point. But so yeah, it's really nice to be able to just open up a text editor and a browser and start writing code and not have to mess around with, opening a terminal window and running command line prompts and messing around with a whole bunch of NPM installs.
And you can just hit F5 to refresh and have the new version of your app. No watch needed.
It's so quaint.
Those are
and this is not for
nice
everybody.
things, but
Yeah.
I grew up coding in compiled languages where this idea of refreshing and seeing the code was never a thing. And in some ways, again, I think it's my history that colors my interpretation. When I got to the web and I could just refresh, I was like, oh, wow, this is so great. And then we pretty quickly, I got into front-end development about the time, right before it really got back to we're going to compile everything and we're going to have all these, transpiled languages come around. But, it is nice, a text editor and an F5, but if you've ever used a tool like ReSharper in C# for really serious engineering, refactoring your code and stuff, a text editor just doesn't cut it. If you want to really craft your code, renaming symbols and refactoring and stuff like that, where you have an editor that can do that sort of stuff for you, it's an entirely different experience.
But you don't lose anything by adding that to your development cycle. If you decide I want to one up and add some highlighting and some auto completion, great.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, I use I do use Gulp to kind of combine a handful of modular JavaScript files into one, and I bolted in some live reload so I can skip the whole Command F5 step there. But this maybe speaks to my audience more than anything. But one of the things I hear from both beginners and folks who are coming from more of a design background, not a back-end background or a computer science background, is anything that starts with just open up terminal is wildly alienating, or just npm install, or even if you're going to use Bower, you can just
buy a MacBook Pro.
Or hey, I'm on Windows. This stuff doesn't work. So I rock Sublime Text. I have all the auto completions. It has a fantastic find and replace functionality. And so I'm not using a completely bare bones setup here. It's not the web development equivalent of a single gear or fixed gear bike, but I am using, I think, a much more minimal setup than is in vogue these days. And I remember for a while, I even resisted using things like Sass because vanilla CSS was good enough. At some point I started to see the benefit of kind of adding a little bit more power there. But
if you can figure out which version of Ruby to install to get it to work.
Yeah. So I actually I don't think I use the Ruby Sass version. I forget what the other compiling option is there. Is there a Node version maybe? At this point, I forget. It's been so long since I set everything up. I just ironically run my npm install on my on my new process every time. But
do you feel like there's some irony in these sorts of? And granted, I find myself saying similar things very often, especially as I get to be older enough that I start working more and more with developers who are closer in age to my daughter than they are to me. But do you find some irony in these statements of, hey, these simpler things are so much nicer when, in the end, software development is ultimately, as a craft, every tool, everything that we build is a process of getting higher and higher level abstractions in place, right? And so we sit today amongst tools that are so infinitely complex, like the number of lines of code in the text editor that you're espousing is more than in the operating systems that we used 15 years ago, right? And I don't know if that's a statement is actually true or not, but I think it's
Emacs was around.
Okay. Yeah, but I don't think the Emacs that you're using today is the same Emacs that was around 15 years ago, right?
Chuck's not here to tell us.
Yeah, no, I mean there is a certain level of irony to it, and I think for me what I really strive for is, ironically, I look for simplicity in process, And there's a counter argument to be made here. Well, like if what you really want is simplicity in process, then you should love all these frameworks that make it simpler to do these powerful things. And that's true, but I'm always trying to balance that against kind of this end user experience. And as much as we can argue that like React and Vue and Angular help promote these really rich front end experiences, they also add so much complexity and fragility and weight and performance issues to the front end.
People don't know how, like, I mean, I make this joke all the time when somebody says the page is loading slow. I say, oh, you just need to include React. It'll make it faster. You know, like just add the script tag. It'll make it But like people get this idea that like, if I use this tool, it's going to solve the world's problems. But the truth is, if you use the tool wrong or you use the wrong tool, you don't solve your problem any better or any more effectively, you know?
The issue that I see happen a lot too with like newer developers is they get super excited about a technology and they use it for something they don't need it for. Like I've seen newer developers get like super excited about React or something or Vue and they code up something, but it's like not displaying any dynamic data. So it really doesn't make sense to use a framework when, you know, you don't have like complex data that you're manipulating or like retrieving anything from back end.
Look, if you've got your HTML is being rendered in ERB, you want to make it faster, you just throw in Vue. It's going to do it.
You could have left off Node and that statement would still be true, by the way, Aimee, because it's just, it's one of the things that draws people, myself included, to this profession is that we like variety, and web development as a whole provides a lot of it. I don't think that's necessarily exclusive to Node folks. I talk to so many developers who jump from framework to framework just because they find it exciting and they like to play around with it, and that's great.
Yeah, that is great. It's important not to stifle that because, you know, that is still something awesome about our industry.
And it's cool to learn different programming patterns because, you know, each one of these frameworks, they come from people that don't like JavaScript and want JavaScript to be more like some other language. So you get to still use JavaScript and like learn 10 languages. You get to learn Erlang and Haskell and Ruby and C# and you didn't even know you were learning them.
One of the things I really wanted to mention in this conversation, and I'm glad you kind of brought it up, is it's not like these tools are not in and of themselves
evil?
The problem. There are certainly some aspects or conventions of them that I don't like. But the bigger problem is not always the tool. It's how people use it. And that's true for anything. One of the things I've found though, that I think is kind of the core of a lot of these issues here is that defaults matter. And I remember I used to have this argument all the time when defending WordPress, because a lot of people who come from a computer science background hate on PHP and by extension also hate on WordPress. And I've always argued that, you know, WordPress is not the problem. Like it's the way you use it. You can build some very fast, high performance sites in WordPress, but there's a lot of really terrible, slow sites that are built on top of it. And a lot of that has to do with the default decisions that were made for the platform. Things like loading JavaScript in the header by default instead of in the footer, and compiling all of these templates kind of in real time every time rather than having caching built in as a default behavior. And I think you often see the same thing with you know, some of these modern front-end JavaScript frameworks where some of the defaults, or at least the things that are taught in the getting started tutorials, reinforce some of these behaviors that I don't like rendering all the things in JavaScript instead of using HTML when that's more appropriate.
All right. So in your opinion, and I want AJ to weigh in on this because I know you got a strong opinion on this, and certainly Aimee as well. Your opinion may not be as vociferous as AJ's is, but I'd like everybody to weigh in on this. How much of this we're talking about? There's been this issue that we've seen lots of labels for JavaScript fatigue and over-engineering, et cetera, et cetera. How much of this is a problem of naivety? Well, I don't know if inexperience versus wisdom. And how much of this is really a problem of the fact that we are doing crazy complex things on a platform that was built to display academic papers, static academic papers. And we've been bolting and bolting onto that platform ever since.
I'd like to hear from AJ first, honestly.
So what I was going to say is the answer to that, to me, is why is jQuery still valid, right? Like, and I was going to ask this earlier, if, to Chris, like, do you think it's still important to use jQuery, as like, if you, as like the simplest, lowest level, the closest to the thing that you want to do without getting tangled up in the weeds, but the weeds are still there. Like, you still can't sanely set a property or an attribute on an HTML element because there are so many edge cases and rules and everything that needs, and because link tags don't function the same as script tags, which don't function the same as style tags, which have a different property than image tags, and then media tags with audio and video, everything. It's like we can't just have source. We have to have source and ref, and then in some cases we have to add type. That we are building on this like screwed up thing. I was so excited to see the fetch API because it's like, okay, now we don't need jQuery Ajax. We don't need any Ajax library at all. Like, we finally have a sane implementation in the browser. But as long as that document platform from the late 80s, early 90s, whatever it was, doesn't provide sane APIs, saying to someone, hey, go learn the vanilla DOM and figure out all 15 million quirks why a text area, you can't access the value of it the same way that you can access an input, and there's also a different way for a radio. Like, it's jQuery's nice. I just .val. It doesn't matter whether it's an input or a text area or a radio. Like, .val is going to give me the answer. Thank goodness.
Okay.
We do have a problem there, I think.
All right. So want to keep this short because we're going to have to wrap this up pretty quick. But I'm going to force you to make a choice here, AJ. Is the problem more people or more this platform, the web as a platform?
Say that one more time, because
Is the problem more people and our tendencies to just go crazy? I mean, we've been talking kind of about this. All of this is just this human nature of using crazy things to solve problems, etc. Is it more with people, or is it more that the platform was never a great platform that we're trying to build on top of?
It's absolutely the people. Because if it were the platform, we could just include a fix the screwups.js in Chrome and not even need to write it in C++.
All right. Chris, are you responding next, or is Aimee responding next?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think it's primarily the people. We do this to ourselves. There's a little bit of a keeping up with the Joneses. There's job descriptions are always looking for someone who's got 5 years experience on something that just came out 3 months ago. So there's this constant kind of cultural pressure within our industry to learn all this stuff that, it just doesn't necessarily really matter.
Okay. Aimee, how about you?
I'm in agreement. That is pretty much the people. But like I said, I mean, I really want to be careful in this episode not to discourage people from like getting excited about this stuff. If anything, just encourages you to dive in deeper, to have like knowledge of when to not use certain things.
Aimee, I don't think you need to worry that you're somehow going to change human nature in this episode.
I don't think.
No, I will second that though.
Just, I don't know. It's just, I know like there's a lot of conversation out there when you get like people like to think in black and white because it's very easy, and it's not a black and white thing. There's a lot of gray area, and it's important for you to understand that gray area.
So I'm going to be the lone dissenting voice here, although as much as I feel like people are a major, human nature is a major problem in this, I think that this would be an entirely different conversation if the platform was a better platform, because having come from a better platform, when I was, when I first started off, I was building desktop apps. And from what I remember, maybe I have my rose-colored glasses on from when back in my day, but trying to do what we're doing on the web and the web having so much that's built into it that cannot be fixed. Just HTTP by itself and the disconnected nature and distributed nature of it all, I think that's it's as much, if not more, the problem than the people.
Interesting.
But if the people were the problem, then when the committee got together, they just say, okay, we'll add the fetch API 20 years ago, and we'll fix this Flexbox thing with CSS, and we're done.
AJ, we both know the TC39 is going to fix the whole problem. They're going to fix it. All right, we got to go switch over to picks. This has actually been such a great, engaging episode. I really am so grateful, AJ, that you were here to participate in this, and Chris, you have been just fantastic. So let's run over to picks.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
AJ, are you ready with yours?
Yeah, there's something I can pick for sure. One, I'm gonna do like the scumbaggiest, like most terrible thing that I can think of to do, and I'm gonna pick Discover, the credit card company. And the reason I prefix it that way is because I'm going to put a link in the show notes here where if you sign up, I get $50, you get $50, we're all happy, and on a rotating quarterly basis, you get 5% cash back on category. And this month it's gas and groceries.
Wow. Awesome.
But, and I'll also pick... did I talk about Mistborn? I've been reading Mistborn finally. It's the first book. I'm just starting the second. The first book is great. I would describe it as Star Wars for Lord of the Rings fans. You know, like if you don't like Star
I don't even know what that means.
Like Lord of the Rings,
it doesn't even make any sense.
But because it's. Read it and let me know what you think if you haven't read it, because I feel like it's Star Wars for the hobbits, almost.
What?
I personally think that author is the best fantasy author of our age.
Oh, he's amazing. And Elantris is my favorite book, maybe out of all the books. But Mistborn, people were raving about it, and I finally picked it up, and I love it.
Cool. All right, Aimee, how about you?
Okay, I have two. The first one is something I saw on Hacker News yesterday. It was a really good article. I mean, I feel like we already all know this, and I don't know, it like kind of sort of relates a tiny bit to what we were talking about, just some like keeping up with the Joneses and that kind of stuff. But it's called Your Smartphone is Making You Stupid, Antisocial, and Unhealthy, so why can't you put it down? So long title there. But it's good. Just a good reminder. Like I said, I feel like we all know this, but it's a good reminder. The other one, I'm going to keep on my... I said on our last episode that I was going to start picking some of the different like cryptocurrency that I was looking into and stuff that I've bought a little bit of. And I think I picked... I probably picked Ripple last week, which I think a lot of people know about that. But this week I'm going to pick one called Funfair. And if you want to check that out, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I'm not saying gambling is a good or a bad thing, but I do like the coin. So anyways, I'll put a link to that one in the show notes. And that's it for me.
Cool. All right. I'll go ahead with mine. I've got two quick picks. The first is a board game. that I've played recently called Mystic Vale. It's actually a card game, but it has a very unique mechanic where you start out with cards and you pick up little things that you actually slide into the sleeves with the original cards and add on to the cards. It's a very fun mechanic and a really great game. Has a couple of expansions out. Really like it. And also, just a couple days ago, I watched a documentary that you can get on Amazon Prime. You have to pay or rent it, called, and I'm going to pronounce this in English, but the name is Turkish. It's Kedi. So I don't know, it's Kedi or Kitty. It's a documentary about the cats in Istanbul. There's like hundreds of thousands of cats that live on the street in Istanbul, and the society embraces how these cats live, and so people just sort of take care of and feed cats that are strays in a way that's somewhat unique in the world at large. But it's a really fantastic and fascinating documentary about the cats in Istanbul called Kedi. Truly enjoyed it. Only like an hour and 20 minutes long. Watched it with the family. Great show. And those are my picks. Chris, how about you?
Awesome. So I have two. The first is shameless self-promotion. If you want to get daily JavaScript tips sent straight to your inbox, head over to gomakethings.com, where I have a daily developer tips newsletter that I send out. The second is if you are a flip-flop fan, you are going to love the Tiva Mush. I cannot say enough great things about this flip-flop. It is so comfortable, so soft. It has an arch built in. It molds to your foot. It's the most comfortable flip-flop I've ever worn, and I can't say enough great things about it.
Wow. Wow, that reminds me of Ward Bell picking a video on how to sharpen pencils, picking flip-flops.
It is truly a life-changing flip-flop. Awesome. I don't think I can oversell it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again, Chris, for being on the show. Had a great time, and it was a great episode. Thanks, AJ and Aimee, for being here, and thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you all next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.